Hello everyone. In this lesson, today we'll talk about modernism. So, I am no editor, so today you won't see much editing effects or after effects. We will be just focusing on our chapter, our lesson. Now, let's proceed towards modernism.
If we go into the definition of modernism, so we can say modernism is a literary and artistic movement that began in the late 19th century and departed from previous traditional and classical forms of art and literature. Modernism movement start हुआ तब we can say in that period सबने ऑल द अदर मूवमेंट्स जो प्रीवियसली आया था लोगों ने उन सारे मूवमेंट्स को रिजेक्ट कर दिया एंड व्हाट वर देयर आर्ग्यूमेंट फॉर दिस रिजेक्शन दे आर्ग्यूड दैट these forms of representation no longer adequately reflected new forms of society कहने का मतलब ये है कि जब मॉडर्निज्म मूवमेंट आई मीन द पीरियड व्हिच वी कंक्लूड एज मॉडर्निज्म तो उस पीरियड में द राइटर्स दे स्टार्टेड आर्ग्यूइंग that all the forms that were before wo that forms no longer represents the new structure of our society, so they needed a new form, which is when modernism was created. So we can say modernism was brought out on a time of great societal upheaval caused by industrialization, modernization, and the First World War. देखो guys, we have to say World War One started all the concept of progress to many. मतलब before World War One, there were ideas of enlightenment. What were the ideas? Enlightenment claimed that new technology would bring progress to humans. Technological advances would improve society and quality of life. तो लोग ये मानते थे कि with जो नए नए टेक्नोलॉजीज आ रहे थे उस टाइम दैट वुड हेल्प पीपल इन डेवलपिंग, बट वो तो हो नहीं रहा था आफ्टर वर्ल्ड वॉर वन. तो वर्ल्ड वॉर वन ने एनलाइटनमेंट का बिलीफ completely destroy कर दिया था because people were seeing that technology is just simply increasing mass destruction of life. So the war resulted in the disillusionment of society and the deep pessimism of human nature. लोग काफी ज्यादा पेसिमिस्टिक हो गए थे आफ्टर द वॉर. 20th सेंचुरी जब स्टार्ट हुआ तब the western world they were using various inventions of the industrial revolution जैसे कि automobile, aeroplane and radio. So these technological innovations challenge traditional notions of what was possible in society. लोगों को लगने लगा like that there was no limit to the innovations they're doing, and modernists were seeing the whole society being transformed by machines. Now we can say the mass urban movement meant that the city became the key context and reference point for both human and nature. Simply कहने से जो mass urban movement start हुआ था, in that movement the city became the main context of a plot, or we can say the main character in the text. So as a result, the city often steered as the main character in modernist text. All these disruptions that were happening in the society brought everything into doubt that was once fixed. The world was no longer reliable and set. Instead, it became slippery and depends on one perspective and subjectivity. Matlab, simply we can say that the people, the way they were seeing the world. See, before this period, everyone had a fixed perspective of seeing the society. But after all these innovations, all these destructions, everything became slippery. People were understanding that reality can be changed depending on people's perspective. मतलब as फिर से अगर मैं समझाऊँ तो say I can simply say a apple is red, but for any other person, they can say the apple is not completely red, or we can say it's nude red or any other shades of red. So it depends on the perspective. Before this, the perspective was fixed. Everyone viewed the world in a simple way, in a fixed way. But here, after all these changes in the society, people began to understand that the perspective is not set anymore. It was slippery. And so, writers, or we can say modernists, required new model to express this uncertainty. एजरा पाउंड जो कि एक बहुत ही प्रोमिनेंट राइटर है, प्रोमिनेंट मॉडर्निस्ट राइटर है, one of his statement, make it new, this statement was given in 1934. This was a statement about modernist movement. This statement came out as a slogan, as an attempt to encourage writers and poets to be innovative in their writing and experiment with new writing styles. So previously, as we know, as all of us has read before, there was always a rhyming scheme, or you can say traditional conventions of writing. But the modernists, they rejected all those traditional convention and started to write in free verse. In Victorian literature, normally there was um, we हम देखते थे, we saw the neutrality and objectivity of third person omniscient narrators. तो third person omniscient narrator किसे कहते हैं? We can say the narrator, or we can say the speaker or the narrator has an insight that he or she knows everything. But because the modernist writers believed in uncertainty, so they rejected omniscient narrator or a third person narrator. Instead, modernist writer embraced sorry embraced subjective language dependent on perspective. As I explained you earlier, subjective language dependent on perspective, it simply means that for a neutral person, see, or we can say that if a person is neutral, he sees the apple as a red apple. But in the modernist language, or the subject language dependent on perspective, people had different perspectives of the same apple. For me, the apple would be simply red. For you, the apple would be nude red or faded red, like that. But still, there was a question that agar reality changes depending on who perceives it, then how can we really trust what we see? And what even is the reality in this slippery world? So, this was the question that modernist text tried to deal. So, as a result, many modernist writers, they um, started writing in first person, but with different characters. Matlab, we can say, suppose you and your brother, huh? You both are different characters, but of the same story. So writers, they used to show, or they used to show the perspective from both of your perspective. None of you, I mean, किसी को भी, they wouldn't make the primary narrator. Understood? So multi-perspectival narration includes various perspectives in one text. For example, you can read James Joyce Ulysses, which was published in 1920. You can read this as a context. So modernists did not believe the traditional forms were fit. So मतलब देखिए देखो, they have to describe the characters inward feeling, which is why they started certain techniques. Some of them are stream of consciousness. interior monologue, and free indirect speech. Okay, now you can ask, what is stream of consciousness? So, stream of consciousness is a kind of narrative device that attempts to express the character's thought as they come. मतलब say the character does not fix his thoughts to a certain context. They tries to express the character's thought just randomly as they come. Interior monologue is a narrative technique where the narrator enters the character's mind to present their thoughts and feelings. Matlab, you have seen in films or maybe read in text, right, where the narrator or you see in a film we sometimes see a narrator entering into the character's mind to know what the character is thinking. So it's that technique, interior monologue, or the last or the like free indirect speech, a narrative technique where a third person narration uses some elements of first person narration by presenting characters' inner workings. Now, there was one more very major event, that is, in 1905 and 1915, Albert Einstein published his story of relativity. Now, I think everyone knows what is the story of relativity, but again, the story of relativity or the theory of relativity proposed that time and space were relative to one's perspective. हम साइंस में नहीं घुसेंगे, बट सिंपली इसका मतलब ये है कि टाइम इज नॉट न्यूट्रल. मतलब बिफोर दैट पीपल ऑलवेज यूज टू लाइक हैव दैट थिंग इन माइंड दैट टाइम इज गोइंग straight day after day after day after day after day. But then this theory of relativity kind of disrupted everyone's knowledge. So people, I mean modernists, they they came out of their limitations, and they knew that time can be easily categorized into past, present, and future. So the modernists, they no longer, I mean, they no longer believed in linear writing in linear timelines. They just followed whatever came into their mind, or you can say as like the stream of consciousness, just randomly as thoughts come into their minds. For example, you can just read the summary of Kurt, Kurt Vogonnet's Slaughterhouse 5 that was published in 1969. Okay, so concluding the essay, there are certain major themes of modernization that are individualism and alienation, and then there was nihilism. Okay, nihilism is a very kind of changing thought that major modernists used to believe in. So, modernism was inspired by the philosophy of nihilism in the sense that it rejected moral and religious principles that were perceived as as the only way to achieve social progress. मतलब, see, before people had a knowledge or people had a belief that if we follow our moral and religious principle, then we would get social progress, right? But then this modernism changed this belief. People people did not believe in religious beliefs anymore. They came out of it, and that concept is called nihilism. It simply, in a sentence, can be said that modernists often believe that for people to be their authentic selves, individuals needed to be free from the overwhelming and restrictive control of conventions. One more major theme is absurdity. देखो, to understand simply, the war, WW1, made a significant impact on the people and also on the writers. poet and writers, they died or they were wounded during the WW1, I mean World War One. Globalization, capitalism, it recreated the society. This created a sense of absurdity in people's life. To get the reference, you can read the summary or the full novel, it's your wish. Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, that was published in 1915. That novel presents the absurdity of modern life when the protagonist or the main character of the novel जो कि एक ट्रैवल सेल्समैन है, वो one day wakes up as a giant cockroach. So see, there is no connection here. How can a salesman wake up as a cockroach? But here lies the absurdity of that of modernism. So absurdity is a very major theme of modernism. Now, to end this essay, there are few. I mean, I will mention few famous or very prominent modernist writers. Those are James Joyce. You can read James Joyce, Franz Kafka, as I've mentioned him many places. Virginia Woolf, probably very highly esteemed modernist, and Ezra Pound. You can read about these writers and then get the full concept of modernism. So that's it, guys. That was about modernism. I'll give you certain links to modernism in the description. You can check them and get the idea itself. Thank you.